I wanted to begin with just a few last comments, very brief, on the chapter that I wrote on prayer. So I won't turn directly to the text, but there are two things I want to remind you about if you've read the text, because I think they're important for our prayer life and to understand what God is up to in responding to our prayers. First of all, beware of self-contradictory prayers. Self-contradictory prayers. Here's a self-contradictory prayer. Lord, give me patience. Quickly. So that would be a self-contradictory prayer. Thankfully, God hears, as I mentioned before, the true intent of our prayers, and would know that we, in that prayer, desire to become a patient person, and he'll be glad to answer the prayer, but not, generally speaking, quickly. Here would be another one. I think I mentioned this in the book. Lord, enable me to heal other people through my prayers, but never to get sick myself. Doesn't work that way. Generally speaking, effectiveness in prayer regarding healing arises out of someone who has suffered himself, herself, and understands empathetically what someone is going through in terms of a chronic illness. So those would be self-contradictory prayers. And God's very gracious when it comes to our prayers and manages to make sense out of what we're saying to him perfectly. Here's another thing to keep in mind. Our prayers can conflict with other folks' prayers. That seems almost to be self-evident. Our prayers can conflict with other people's prayers. I learned this, I don't see her here today. Well, I was praying when Natalie, my daughter, was growing up. We would spend time at bedtime talking about stuff. And there was once we were talking and it had started to snow in the night. And Natalie said a prayer, like any kid would say a prayer who doesn't want school the next day. Oh, Lord, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. No school, Lord, tomorrow, let it snow. That's a wonderful prayer, isn't it? And then her mean-spirited father, Natalie had responded. Natalie had been going down to downtown, I think to St. John's, and distributing lunches down there to homeless folks. So what did I say? I said, Natty, how do you think those folks are feeling about the snow that is now falling? Now, she didn't hit me. She just pondered. And then she said, I think this is a quote. She said, Dad, they'd be so cold. And I just let it rest. All the time, thankfully, God can make sense out of this. All the time, at this very moment, millions and millions of prayers are ascending to God. And only God can know what to do with them all. Because we are very complex beings. One human life is extremely, extremely complex. One. And we've got millions of God's precious image bearers around the world praying all the time. Just ponder that with me. God can surely know what to do with those prayers and how to answer those prayers. But it gives me pause for my tendency to think, that God should answer my prayer exactly the way I have offered it. So there's space in there to pray directly and openly and honestly, knowing that God will answer our prayer. And part of the mystery and wonder and glory, I suppose, is God sometimes will answer in ways that seem to be a non-answer. But actually, the answer, as I said, I think a couple of weeks ago, to the deeper intent of our prayer, which I would say, like we pray in the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done. Thy will be done. Well, chapter 8. Slow down, quiet down. If you have the book, I'll just toss out a page number at you, page 201. Debbie, my wife, and I had an interesting experience in France when we lived over there. We decided to head down to southern France. Where we lived was kind of in the middle of France on the border with Switzerland. So we took the TGV, le train de grande vitesse, le train de grande vitesse, being translated, the train of great speed, the TGV. And we thought it would be fun. And we would get to our destination very quickly and see lots of stuff on the way, just more quickly than normal. Well, we got there quickly. But we didn't see a heck of a lot because that train went so fast, you got a headache looking out the window because everything it's just speeding by so rapidly. You could, by the time you started to focus on something out the window, it was gone. And I think there's a parable in there some way. So on commenting on the need to slow down and quiet down in our lives, generally speaking, and also our lives with God, I wrote this. 201. Our experience on the TGV is a parable of sorts for the pace at which many of God's precious image bearers are leading their lives in the 21st century. Our lives move at TGV speed, but God moves at a much slower pace. How ironic to live at a pace where, in a manner of speaking, we leave God trailing behind. If we move too fast in too loud an environment, we miss much along the way, inattentive to the gifts that God generously offers each day. I heard that a little bit, what Marcia was saying today. The need to slow down, the need to quiet down, the need to cultivate attentiveness to what God is providing us with all the time. But if we're moving too quickly, if our lives are too noisy, we won't perceive what God is offering. And sometimes we're looking in the wrong direction for the gifts that He will offer to us. I'll develop that a little bit in a minute. The rhythm of Jesus' life, this is 203 and following. The rhythm of Jesus' life is very distinct. It's very distinct. Now, Luke wants us to catch this. So a text that I continually come back to when my life begins to be insane is Luke chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. Luke likes to juxtapose things. He likes to put something side by side that we wouldn't expect to be side by side. So in Luke 15, he describes how busy Jesus is. How busy Jesus is. People are coming to be healed. People are coming whose families are disrupted. People have died. a list of the things that Jesus is constantly doing to extend the kingdom of God and his own personal reality in their lives. Luke draws attention to that. So when you spot that in that text, camp there a little while. Jesus was a busy person. And then Luke says the most outrageous thing in verse 16. Verse 16, the very next verse. But Jesus would often withdraw to lonely places and pray. See what Luke did? Jesus had the most important work in human history. Honest. The most important work in human history. And that work is described in verse 15 of Luke chapter 5. Luke wants us to spot that. And the next thing that Luke writes, which I would think should jar all of us, is, but Jesus would often withdraw to lonely places and pray. He does that in verse 16. He does that so he can do verse 15. And we've lost our minds. We've lost our minds. We live, and this is going to happen to pastors and priests, we live in verse 15. And we're sorely tempted to look at verse 16 and say, yeah. No. If verse 16 isn't a constant rhythm in our lives, verse 15 won't happen well. And that's one of the reasons why pastors and priests are burning out on a grand scale. And God's precious image bearers, let's include all of us. Life will not make sense in relationship with Jesus. Life will not make sense in relationship with Jesus if we don't pay attention to how he lived and conducted his own ministry. Dallas Willard wrote this. He developed these texts a little bit. And then he said something like, this is Jesus Christ, God incarnate, finding it necessary to constantly withdraw into silence and solitude in prayer. Quote from Dallas, how much more so we in our much more troubled condition. How much more so we in our much more troubled condition. So for example, what I've had to do in my own life across the years is to purposely structure into my daily schedule verse 16 so that I don't lose my mind and also harm the other people that I'm involved with in terms of teaching. No verse 16, no verse 15. Do not be self-deceived. And actually, verse 16 leads to sanity, holiness, wholeness. It's a great prescription. So I'm now writing, Dr. Hall's writing out a prescription. There it is. Silence, solitude, prayer on a regular basis. There's some things that I wanted you to pause with me and reflect upon regarding these broad issues. Take a look at, if you have the book, take a look at page 204. This pause and reflect section. Let me read this to you. This is an invitation to ponder. Take time to ponder these questions. What noises and voices are echoing through the corridors of my mind and heart that must be stilled? Another way to put that is when you're not thinking about anything else, what bubbles to the surface of your consciousness. What people, what voices, what situations, and so on. What truths must I settle on, like a hen softly resting on her eggs? What might birth within me if I would simply slow down, quiet down, settle down? Are there any possibilities and prayers incubating in me that can only be birthed in silence and solitude? In silence and solitude and quiet and slowness, things bubble to the surface of our consciousness, things that are inhabiting our heart, but we're not normally aware that they're there until we quiet down and settle down, like a hen settling on her eggs. Ponder that with me. Bottom of the page. Oh, this is very important. Neil Postman has since died. You can find his name toward the bottom of page 204. He was a cultural commentator. I don't know that he was a Christian. He was a cultural commentator, and in 1986, now think where we are in, what year are we in? 2023. In 1986, Postman wrote a book called Entertaining Ourselves to Death. Entertaining Ourselves to Death. I'll just read part of this. If you have not read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, written back, I think, in the 40s, read that book. It is a prophecy of sorts of where we are today. So Postman writes this: when a population becomes distracted by trivia, when cultural life is redefined as a perpetual round of entertainments, when serious public conversation becomes a form of baby talk. Let me read that again. I'm now thinking of perhaps some folks in Washington on both sides of the aisle. When public conversation becomes a form of baby talk. When, in short, a people become an audience and their public business a vaudeville act, then a nation finds itself at risk. Culture death is a real possibility. Now, he wrote that back in 1986. And I want you to ponder that. Lewis comments, C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite writers who basically saved my life when I was a young man. He wrote screw tape letters. Now, screw tape letters are demons talking to one another. This is not the voice of God. These are demonic voices. And one of the things that they talk about, Uncle Wormwood, Uncle Screwtape and his nephew Wormwood, one of the things they talk about is the importance of getting people interested in nothing. Think about that. Getting people interested in nothing. And I quote from Lewis, hopefully with the voice of a demon. And nothing is very strong. Strong enough to steal away a man's best years. Not in sweet sins, but in the dreary flickering of the mind over it knows not what. It does not matter how small the sins are, provided that their cumulative effect is to edge the man away from the light and out into the nothing. So, in a little bit of a commentary on that, I write, with every hour watching TV or surfing our favorite website, media debris slowly drifts to the floor of our conscious and unconscious mind. Periodically, the floor needs sweeping. Slowness, solitude, and silence provide the broom and dustpan. Think about that with me. I watch television. I love film. Probably sometime today I might watch a football game, surely tomorrow night. But the price one pays for occasionally exposing oneself to what we find on television is mental debris builds up in our minds. And we're unaware of its presence there unless we consciously step away from time to time from the very entertainment that we're enjoying. I encourage you to remember that television is about selling commercials. It's about selling commercials. That's how most, other than PBS, and even PBS now in some ways, people are creating this diversion to make money on you and me. And sometimes I voluntarily succumb. But I want to be aware of what they're presenting and why they're presenting it. Joyce Huggett, I hope this book is still in print. I'm not sure that it is. She wrote a book called The Joy of Listening to God. Joyce did. She since died. I think she died back in the 80s. It was one of the first books I read on this topic, and it really caught my attention. And she used a phrase in this book called the discipline of the godly pause. What's a godly pause? Well, all of us today, we're going to be doing stuff. Just doing stuff. A godly pause would be occasionally to stop and, if need be, regain our sanity. A godly pause. She writes, quote, when taking paper out of my typewriter, well, that just aged her. When taking paper out of my typewriter or making myself a cup of coffee or waiting at traffic lights, I would turn my mind Godwards quite deliberately. Often God would communicate his presence to me in some felt way. Now that's the phrase I want you to hear. I would turn my mind Godwards quite deliberately. So we start off quite deliberately. What can happen and develop over time is our mental habit patterns will actually change. And what was at first a quite disciplined step into spiritual sanity becomes more and more second nature. The discipline of the godly pause. Now, I quote from Mary Pfeiffer here on page 206. I don't believe that Mary is a believer, but she reminds us, she's writing about television, she reminds us that, quote, real life is rather quiet and routine. Most pleasures are small pleasures. A hot shower, a sunset, a bowl of good soup, or a good book. Television suggests that life is high drama, love, and sex. TV families are radically different from real families. Things happen much faster to them. On television, things are not visually interesting, such as thinking, reading, and talking are ignored. Instead of ennobling our ordinary experiences, I like that phrase, let's ennoble our ordinary experiences. Instead of ennobling our ordinary experiences, television suggests that they are not of sufficient interest to document. And there's a part of me that wants to yell out something that I won't yell out in church. So this kind of technology is part of our lives. I admit it. Social media, television, film, all part of our lives. But if we're not careful, if we don't develop what I would call a discerning spirit toward what we're being presented with, we actually start believing that what's on television is reality. It's not. Even the news. If it bleeds, it leads. Why? Because people get interested. I've noticed how we watch, Debbie and I watch ABC David Muir. He seems to me one of the more sensitive, sane talking heads. And yet, I've noticed that you get 15, 20 minutes of news, and then you get 4 minutes of images and advertisements, and then you get 30 seconds. And then you get 3 or 4 minutes, and you get another 3 minutes. Just beware of what television is doing. And I say this, the man who sets this up for me every week, he's not here this week, the man who sets the camera, microphone up every week works for NBC News. He does their Sunday morning news from 4 to 7. And he comes in and we chuckle about what's going on in the news station. Now these are God's image bearers as much as anybody. But there's a way of interacting with what's going on, I think, that is a way of wisdom. So Richard Foster, who I worked with for a long time, he wrote a book called Celebration of Discipline. Maybe some of you have read that book. Sold lots and lots of copies. And in his introduction to his chapter on Lectio Divina, which we've talked about in here, in his introduction to that chapter, he writes this. This so caught my attention. When I was about 25, I memorized it. I thought, Hall, if you memorize anything, memorize these lines, because it's really important. So Richard wrote, in contemporary society, our adversary, the devil, majors in 3 things: noise, hurry, and crowds. If he can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, he will rest satisfied. Now think about that with me. Write those 3 words down or plan them in your mind. Noise, hurry, and crowds. Let's think just for a moment here about crowds. So I wrote this on page 207. Ponder with me for a moment the influence of crowds. Our families, peer groups, local communities, work environments, and national contexts influence us daily. An occasional, here's the heart of the matter, an occasional long step away from the crowd helps us regain our balance and focus. A key question to ask is this: Is my normal environment helping me love other people or not? Is my normal environment, I'll add on, and what I continually expose myself to in terms of voices, influences, and so on, helping me love other people or not? To be specific, are there so-called normal aspects of my environment, everybody would consider them to be normal, my familial, cultural, political, or ecclesial context, that from the perspective of Jesus' kingdom are abnormal at best and sinful at worst? Think that one through with me. How about noise? How about noise? Down at the bottom of the page, Foster also mentions noise and hurry as devilish tools and tactics. How so? Noise distracts. Noise drowns out. Noise diverts. Distraction averts our attention from the most important things. It strangles attentiveness. Once again, next page. Once again, Uncle Screwtape. Remember, he's a devil. He warns his nephew Wormwood that he must never allow those he tempts to experience two things: music and silence. He warns his nephew, do not let them experience music, do not let them experience silence. Because if they do, their minds and hearts will be attracted to the one we hate so much. And this is a direct quote from Uncle Screwtape. Noise alone defends us from silly qualms, despairing scruples, and impossible desires. We will make the whole universe a noise in the end. We've already made great strides in this direction as regards the earth. The melodies and silences of heaven. Let me repeat that. The melodies and silences of heaven will be shouted down in the end. But I admit we are not yet loud enough or anything like it. Research is in progress. Lewis wrote that in the 1940s. I see Uncle Screwtape smiling at 23. So we're in the back stretch. There is something that I want you to become aware of. I have it on 208 for you. Hurry sickness. When I first ran across what hurry sickness is, I was surprised that this is now classified by the American Psychological Association as an illness that modern people are afflicted with. And it made sense that Richard had written what he wrote when he talked about noise, hurry, and crowds. It caught my attention too because John Ortberg had written, now listen up, love and hurry are fundamentally incompatible. Love and hurry are fundamentally incompatible. Love always takes time, doesn't it? Love always takes time. And time is the one thing hurried people don't have. Psychology Today defines hurry sickness as, quote, a behavior pattern characterized by a continual rushing and anxiousness, an overwhelming and continual sense of urgency. It's a sickness in which a person feels chronically short of time, and so tends to perform every task faster and to get flustered when encountering any kind of delay. We have all the time we need. That's not in the book. We have all the time we need if we can wisely slow down and strain out, and perhaps through the power of the Spirit have injected into our spiritual bloodstream an antidote for hurry sickness. Now catch this. A national survey in USA Today, quote, revealed that the vast majority of Americans feel they are busier this year than last year. And they were busier last year than the year before. And for better or worse, the pace of life is speeding up to make us feel trapped in a time crunch. And I want to scream out at the top of my lungs, no! No. It's not worth it. Dallas Willard was having a conversation with John Ortberg. I know it's Dallas Willard because John mentioned it. He's having a conversation with Dallas. And he basically asked Dallas, what's the most important thing we all need to know about spiritual growth and development? What's the most important one? Now, Dallas was a philosopher at USC, one of the most gifted writers on the spiritual life in the 20th century. So how's Dallas going to respond to John's question? Here was John's question. What he needed to do to maintain his spiritual health. Okay, you're here with me, I think, because we're friends and because we want to stay spiritually healthy, huh? Right. We want to stay spiritually healthy, spiritually wise, grow, become more mature as each day goes on. How did Dallas respond? Quote, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Now, I thought, of all the things that Dallas could have said, adverb is important here, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. That's a good one, John replied. What else? Dallas, there is nothing else. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. So I thought when I was writing, I thought, well, let's look up the adverb ruthlessly. It's quite an adverb. Here's the definition. Without pity or compassion, mercilessly, unsympathetic. So if I'm understanding Ortberg's mentor correctly, I must be ruthless with hurry in my life. I must make no excuses for why I hurry through day after day. I must show hurry no compassion. I must kill it. How about you? So what are some characteristics? I got a few minutes here. What are some characteristics of hurry sickness? I went through these and I had about 8 out of 10. Working on it takes a while. Spiritual formation is the slowest of all human movements. Here's one. Do you find yourself constantly speeding up your daily activities? How about multitasking? God's truth, I wrote about it here. I pulled up to a stop sign. I was driving home when I still was at Eastern. I pulled up to a stoplight, and my pal Joe Monica, I'll name him, the chaplain at Eastern. He's a wonderful guy. He wouldn't mind me sharing this at me with you because he throws me under the bus all the time. So I pull up next to Joe. I notice him, and I look over at him, and he has his newspaper at the stoplight. He has his newspaper spread out over the steering wheel. Oh my goodness. So I went, And he looked over and I went, That's multitasking. Trying to do more than one thing at a time, and when we do so, we do nothing well. But somehow that's an aspect of this strange disease, hurry sickness. Oh, do you ever count the number of cars in front of you on the freeway? Sure, I say to myself, who doesn't? If you move beyond counting cars to changing lanes, having carefully computed the fastest lane, you might well have hurry sickness. Everybody's looking down. Or how about, in fact, Nathan Foster, Richard's son, he works with Renovari. As a spiritual discipline, he recommended to the staff purposely staying in the right-hand lane. You could just see us, I'll die first. How about this? This is me again. How about looking for the fastest checkout line at the grocery store? I do this all the time, still do. I just have to confess my sins every week. Which line is longest? If I match myself with that person in that line, will I win? Will I win? And if you win, not only do I look for the fastest lane, but I find myself competing with folks in the line I thought was going to be slower than mine. I just did this the other day at Wawa, God's truth, a local convenience store. I felt a sense of disappointment as the person who was where I would have been checked out first. I had lost. I probably have hurry sickness. Now here's an important one. Do I have a hard time saying no?
Oh yes.
Do I have a hard time saying no? Absolutely. I'm a people pleaser. I don't want to let people down. Here's the question I asked myself as I was writing. What are the hidden costs in my life every time I say yes when no would have been a wiser response? And finally, there's something known as sunset fatigue, where we're so tired at the end of the day that we have no time, energy, or love for those who matter most to us. Sunset fatigue. Now, probably time to draw to a close. I have a long section in here you might find of interest on the desert dwellers. These are folks who headed out into the Syrian desert and then the Egyptian desert because they were facing things like hurry sickness. They just didn't know what to call it. And Thomas Merton, someone who's helped me a lot, he was a Catholic monk, asked this question, and we'll close with this. Why did they do this? Merton asked. Merton believed that desert Christians increasingly discerned, this is on 218, increasingly discerned that the society in which they had lived had quite frankly lost its mind. It's possible for a culture to lose its mind. Like lemmings heading for the cliff. He writes, quote, society, which meant pagan society, limited by the horizons and prospects of life in this world, was regarded by them as a shipwreck from which each single individual man had to swim for his life. These were people who believed that to let oneself drift along passively accepting the tenets and values of what they knew as society, was purely and simply a disaster. They knew they were helpless to do any good for others as long as they floundered about in the wreckage. But once they got a foothold on solid ground, things were different. Then they had not only the power, but even the obligation to pull the whole world to safety after them. And I comment, the great danger, one that lurks below the surface of our consciousness, is to drift mindlessly along with the broader cultural consensus, passively floating downstream without heeding the white water ahead. Folks, there is white water ahead. And what our culture will deeply need, in the future will deeply need, are wise, mature Christians who are living, thinking, worshiping. I'm thinking particularly are living and thinking in a sane manner. Because we are called, Jesus commanded this. This is top of the line. Jesus commanded. Two most important commands. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And we can't love our neighbor well if we don't slow down and quiet down. Well, I threw a lot at you.
Yeah.
Have a good week. God bless.